afternoon, Bulldog fans. We just finished Coach Joe Moorhead's presser, kind of wrapping up the Kansas State game and looking forward to Kentucky. But there were a lot of comments we thought stood out. I think one that really needs to be reminded is he said, don't let one game beat you twice, which is a way of saying, yes, they're still hurt by losing to Kansas State, as much the way they lost as the final result, but they're definitely trying to keep a hangover effect going into this week. Said they had a good practice yesterday, and now they're on to game week.
And he did say, too, they gave the guys some time to vent yesterday. And he said by the end of practice, they were ready to get on to Kentucky, had a much better energy. And that's part of it. I mean, this is a game that most people expected Mississippi State to win. The odds makers had Mississippi State winning. We all had Mississippi State winning. Mississippi State had Mississippi State winning, and you come up a little bit short. And it wasn't just one play. It feels like that. But when you go back and you objectively look at it, this was a team loss. We talk about a team win. They were failures on offense. They were failures on defense. They were failures with coaching, failures with special teams. It was a complete failure in many respects, and ultimately that's why you lost the ball game.
One thing I did like about what the coach said today was, yes, he talked about how close it was, hard-fought loss, but he didn't use that as any sort of excuse. Basically saying that Mississippi State had no reason not to make those one or two plays in areas. So instead of saying, well, what if, he's saying what should have been. And that's a little different mindset maybe than we expected going into this.
Well, and we want to get into what should have been. You know, David, Mississippi State should have been at full strength on the roster. Right. Mississippi State was not at full strength on the roster due to some selfish decisions by some players. Have been well documented. But also, too, Cameron Dantzler is a late scratch because, he's not healthy. Nick Gibson also a late scratch. And, we were told, David, after the Southern Miss game, those guys were eligible to return. Yeah. A week's worth of practice, they weren't eligible this past Saturday to play because physically they weren't ready to go. And so when you begin to factor in the fact that you've got some guys suspended and then you've got your top cornerback out, you've got arguably your best defensive lineman out in Lee Autry, at least on the interior, and you've got Willie Gay out, you begin to see this, and you can see why Mississippi State simply can't afford about with the injury bug.
And again, injuries are beyond a coach's control. So are actions by players that lead to suspensions. That can't be controlled. What can be controlled is who lines up this weekend. So at this point, in retrospect, what we hear is probably that Tommy Stevens was a game-time decision, as they said, and he practiced but barely practiced. Now, Coach Moorhead said today he's feeling much better. He's feeling better yesterday. He's much better than he was last week. So it looks like he'll be back in the starting lineup this week.
Yeah, I would certainly think so. And you're right, Coach Moorhead did say that compared to where he was last week, there is no comparison. And he got a little tight, on Saturday. But the bottom line is he's the quarterback. The offense runs a lot more fluidly and a lot higher proficiency, David, when he's in the ball game. And so Garrett Schrader is going to be a great quarterback here at Mississippi State. I think he's shown enough right now to really get people fired up. But this is Tommy Stevens' show, and we expect him to be the guy this Saturday.
Of course, we'll talk more Friday about the matchup with Kentucky. But what we came away talking about Kansas State is if State's quarterback is able to run on offense, it probably changes the game. And it did somewhat in the second half because even though Schrader's not throwing the ball well, the running aspect started to wear at Kansas State's defense. If Tommy Stevens is unable to run well against Kentucky, do you think about using Schrader more? Because you can't just sit back there and let Kylan Hill run the ball only and Tommy Stevens pass only. You have to have that element for this offense to fully function as it's designed. Yeah,
I mean, I think yes, David. I think the answer to that question is, when you look at this offensive system, you have to have the running component with the quarterback involved. The quarterback has to be involved in the running game in order for this thing to run at its true proficiency. If not, Kylan Hill becomes enemy number one for opposing defenses. And listen, we saw that Saturday, and he still was able to go for over 100 yards. And so if you're able to have a complement to that, I think that only makes it better offensively. But, Garrett Schrader, I thought, gave us everything that he had on Saturday, and a couple passes here and there, but he's a true freshman. That's one of the things I think people forget when you plug a guy out there and you think, okay, it's the next man up mentalities they always talk about, but this is a guy that wasn't too long ago was getting ready for homecoming, in high school and for the homecoming dance and deciding who he's going to ask, and now he's out here taking the first-team reps probably as a potential starter should Tommy Stevens have a setback this week in the SEC opener. That's a pretty tall order, David.
One more quick thing on quarterbacks before we move on to injuries. What was your takeaway on the comments or non-comments on the status of Keaton Thompson?
I don't know what to make of it. I'll be honest with you, David. It's like we've heard some conflicting things, and I don't want this to turn into something where it becomes a talking point. But, we were told after a Southern Miss game that Keaton was eligible to play, that he was available to play, but he simply didn't play. And then now we've been told, for a couple times in the past 72 hours is that there's some injury things that he's working through. I don't know. I really don't know, but I think it's one of those situations where Joe Moorhead has his guy, and Joe Moorhead has his future. And I think you see in a situation now that we want Tommy to go win the ball game for us, and hopefully that provides opportunity for us to get Garrett's feet wet a little bit. But you do have the 4-game redshirt deal, so you'd like to be able to preserve those 4 years of eligibility if at all possible.
So we didn't expect really a hard answer on that, or a clear answer, and we didn't get one. But we didn't get to any true clarification on injuries other than what we expected. A lot of day-to-days. That includes guard Darren Parker, who I think would have made a big difference this past week, certainly because State's offensive line struggled for a half there, and you certainly against the Kentucky defensive line, which we watched the Florida game the other night, they're a good solid unit too, so you need your line at full strength. Nick Gibson, day-to-day as well, and Cam Dantzler. I thought it was interesting that he listed Stevens, Gibson, and Parker as day-to-day and practicing. He said Cam Dantzler is day-to-day, but did not say he was practicing.
Yeah, I caught that distinction too. I don't know what quite to make of that, but yeah, he did mention that, and that was one of the things too. All week last week, we were told that Cam was going to play and was available, and then he's not listed on the holdout sheet, the availability sheet that we get every Saturday on game day, and get out to warm ups and find out that he's not available. So.
Also, obviously, we did not expect any clarification on players who will or will not be available as far as the suspension process, but I think everyone seems to agree that Lee Autry, having played 2 weeks against Southern Miss, and we got a little clarification off the record on some of the reasons why that happened instead of saving for Kansas State. But now there's still 3 games left he can work, as far as we know, and we deduced that Willie Gay has 4 games to play. We thought he might play this past weekend. We've got to believe he's going to play this weekend.
I would think so, David. I mean, I think,
I'm putting you in a bad position there, but we're all guessing at this point. But we think, given the matchup and the need to win an SEC game, you're going to have your guns out there.
I think it was a real possibility that he would play this weekend, and then with losing last week, I think it's probably relative certainty that he's going to play this weekend. And Mississippi State needs to be at full strength. It's the SEC opener, and listen, you opened up 0-2 in the league last year. You need to find a way to get off on the positive side of things this year, and this fan base and this team needs a win. And so I think you're going to go out both barrels blazing and see what you can do on Saturday.
Speaking of fan base, at the end of the press conference, as you can check on the video that Steve will be posting shortly, Coach Moorhead made an appeal to the fans that you're needed out here at Scott Field, and we understand there were some pretty good ticket sales this past week, on top of the regular season ticket sales that a lot of single games were bought for Kentucky. Conditions, as best we know, forecast about 88 high that day, kickoff 3 o'clock. And by the way, it is SEC Network, not the alternate, so it will be on television legitimately. But still, he's making the appeal for the fans to show up because they're needed, and basically promise that the team will put the loss behind them but come out with a little more edge, a little bit more attitude, which is something that maybe we saw lacking certainly in the first half last week. But he's made it pretty clear that the team knows just how important this week is, and he wants the fans to understand that they understand it, but they want the fans to play their part as well.
And that's true, David. And here's the thing. No matter what's happened already in 3 games, this is a good football team. They didn't play it in spots on Saturday, but this is a good football team. It's the SEC opener. And as you always say, David, we only get a handful of these every year. Come out, be a part of it. And we're not just here for the party. We're here for the ball game. So come on out, bring the cowbells, be loud and proud. Bring them and ring them, as Coach Sherrill used to say. But the bottom line is Mississippi State needs a win this weekend, and it needs to be a hostile environment when Kentucky gets here.
So that's our report for today. Paul Jones working on a story of some sidelines that he picked up there. Robbie Falk had our game thread as well during the course of this. Steve will be posting this video and others. I'll be writing a lead on that, and we'll be getting full into game week coverage here with our Gene's Page 24 staff. For our cameraman Mike Nemeth and for Steve Robertson here, this is David Murray from the SEAL Center on the Mississippi State campus.